How's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to read some Kant. Let me just share my screen. So here we have it. The Transcendental Doctrine of Elements, first part, the Transcendental Aesthetic. In whatever way and through whatever means a cognition may relate to objects, that through which it relates immediately to them, and at which at all thought as means is directed is as an end, is intuition. We have B2 here. So here we have the definition for intuition. Intuition is opposed to the concept, which is merely the mark of intuition. The universal must be given in the particular. That is, through that, it has significance. Okay. This, however, takes place only insofar as the object is given to us. But this, in turn, is possible only if it affects the mind in a certain way. The capacity, receptivity to acquire representations through the way in which we are affected by objects is called sensibility. Objects are therefore given to us by means of sensibility, and it alone affords us intuitions, but they are thought through the understanding, and from it arise concepts. But all thought, whether straight away, direct, or through a detour indirect, must ultimately be related to intuitions, thus, in our case, to sensibility, since there is no other way in which objects can be given to us. The effect of an object on the capacity for representations, insofar as we are affected by it, is sensation. That intuition which is related to the object through sensation is called empirical. The undetermined object of an empirical intuition is called appearance. I call that, in the appearance which corresponds to sensation, its matter, but that which allows the manifold of appearance to be intuited or ordered in certain relations, I call the form of appearance, since that within which the sensations can alone be ordered and placed in a certain form cannot itself be in turn sensation. The matter of all appearance is only given to us a posteriori, but its form must already lie for it in the mind a priori, and can therefore be considered separately from all sensation. I call all representations pure in the transcendental sense, in which nothing is to be encountered that belongs to sensation. Accordingly, the pure form of sensible intuition in general is to be encountered in the mind a priori, wherein all the manifold of appearance is intuited in certain relations. This pure form of sensibility itself is also called pure intuition. So if I separate from the representation of a body that which the understanding thinks about it, such as substance, force, divisibility, etc., as well as that which belongs to sensation, such as impenetrability, hardness, color, etc., something from this empirical intuition is still left for me, namely extension and form. These belong to the pure intuition, which occurs a priori, even without an actual object of the senses or sensation, as a mere form of sensibility in the mind. I call a science of all principles of a priori sensibility the transcendental aesthetic. There must therefore be such a science, which constitutes the first part of the transcendental doctrine of elements, in contrast to that which contains the principles of pure thinking and is named transcendental logic. So there's just a footnote here that we will read. The Germans are the only ones who now employ the word aesthetics to designate that which others called a critique of taste. The ground for this is a failed hope held by the excellent analyst Baumgarten of bringing the critical estimation of the beautiful under principles of reason and elevating its rules to a science. This effort is futile, for the putative results of criteria are merely empirical as far as their sources are concerned, and can therefore never serve as a priori rules concerning to which our judgment of taste must be directed. Either the latter constitutes the genuine touchstone of the correctness of the former, For this reason, it is advisable again to desist from the use of this term and to save it for that doctrine which is true, whereby one would come closer to the language and the sense of the ancients, among whom the division of cognition into aisthenate kai no neta was well known. Okay. In the transcendental aesthetic, we will therefore first isolate sensibility by separating off everything that the understanding thinks through its concepts, so that nothing but empirical intuition remains. Second, we will then detach from the latter everything that belongs to sensation, so that nothing remains except pure intuition and the mere form of appearances, which is the only thing that sensibility can make available a priori. In this investigation, it will be found that there are two pure forms of sensible intuition as principles of a priori cognition, namely space and time, with the assessment of which we will now be concerned. The transcendental aesthetic first section on space. By means of outer sense, property of our mind, we represent ourselves objects as outside us, and all as in space. In space, their form, magnitude, and relation to one another is determined, or determinable. Inner sense, by means of which the mind intuits itself, or its inner state, gives, to be sure, no intuition of the soul itself as an object, yet it is still a determined form, under which the intuition of its inner state is alone possible. So that everything that belongs to the inner determinations is represented in relations of time. Time can no more be intuited externally than space can be intuited as something in us. Now, what are space and time? Are they actual entities? Are they only determinations or relations of things, yet ones that would pertain to them even if they were not intuited? Or are they relations that only attach to the form of intuition alone, and thus to the subjective constitution of our mind, without which these predicates could not be ascribed to anything at all? In order to instruct ourselves about this, we will consider space first. 1. Space is not an empirical concept that has been drawn from outer experience. For in order for certain sensations to be related to something outside me, i.e. to something in another space, in space from that in which I find myself, thus in order for me to represent them as outside one another, thus not merely as different, but as in different places, the representation of space must already be their ground. Thus, the representation of space cannot be obtained from the relations of outer appearance through experience, but this outer experience is itself first possible only through this representation. 2. Space is a necessary representation, a priori, which is the ground of all outer intuitions. One can never represent that there is no space, although one can very well think that there are no objects to be encountered in it. It is therefore to be regarded as the condition of the possibility of appearances, not as a determination dependent on them, and as an a priori representation that necessarily grounds outer appearances. 3. The apodictic certainty of all geometrical principles and the possibility of their a priori construction are grounded in this a priori necessity. For if this representation of space were a concept acquired a posteriori, which was drawn out of general outer experience, the first principle of mathematical determination would be nothing but perceptions. They would therefore have all the contingency of perception, and it would not even be necessary that only one straight line lie between 2 points, but experience would merely always teach that what is borrowed from experience always has only comparative universality, namely through induction. One would therefore only be able to say that as far as it has been observed to date, no space has been found that has more than 3 dimensions. 4. Space is not a discursive, or as is said, general concept of relations of things. but a pure intuition. For first, one can only represent a single space, and if one speaks of many spaces, one understands by that only parts of one and the same unique space. And these parts cannot, as it were, precede the single all-encompassing space as its components from which its composition would be possible, but rather are only thought in it. It is essentially single, the manifold in it. Thus also, the general concept of space in general rests merely on limitations. From this it follows that in respect to it, an a priori intuition which is not empirical grounds all concepts of them. Thus, all geometrical principles that in a triangle two sides together are always greater than the third are never derived from general concepts of line and triangle, but are rather derived from intuition and indeed derived from a priori with apodictic certainty. Space is represented as a given infinite magnitude, a general concept of space which is common to a foot as well as an eel, can determine nothing in respect of magnitude. If there were not boundlessness in the progress of intuition, no concept of relations could bring with it a principle of their infinity. Conclusions from the above concepts. Space represents no property at all of any things in themselves, nor any relation of them to each other, no determination of them that attaches to objects themselves, and that would remain even if one were to abstract from all subjective conditions of intuition. For neither absolute nor relative determinations can be intuited prior to the existence of the space to which they pertain, thus be intuited a priori. Space is nothing other than merely the form of all appearances of outer sense, the subjective conditions of sensibility under which alone outer intuitions is possible for us. Now, since the receptivity of the subject to be affected by objects necessarily precedes all intuition of these objects, it can be understood how the form of all appearance can be given in the mind prior to all actual perceptions. Thus, a priori, and how as pure intuition in which all objects must be determined, it can contain principles of their relations prior to all experience. We can accordingly speak of space, extended beings, and so on, only from the human standpoint. If we depart from the subjective condition under which we alone can acquire outer intuition, namely that through which we may be affected by objects, then the representation of space signifies nothing at all. This predicate is attributed to things only insofar as they appear to us, are objects of sensibility. The constant form of this receptivity, which we call sensibility, is a necessary condition of all the relations within which objects can be intuited as outside us. And if one abstracts from these objects, it is a pure intuition which bears the name of space. Since we cannot make the special conditions of sensibility into conditions of the possibility of things, but only of their appearances, we can say that space comprehends all things that may appear to us externally, but not all things in themselves, whether they be intuited or not. By whatever subject they may be intuited, for we cannot judge at all whether the intuitions of other thinking beings are bound to the same conditions that limit our intuition and that are universally valid for us. If we add the limitations of a judgment to the concept of the subject, then the judgment is unconditionally valid. The proposition all things are next to one another in space is valid only under the limitation that these things be taken as objects of our sensible intuition. If here I add the condition to the concept and say, quote, all things as outer intuitions are next to one another in space, then this rule is valid universally and without limitation. Our exposition accordingly teach the reality, objective validity of space in regard to everything that can come before us externally as an object, but at the same time the ideality of space in regard to things when they are considered in themselves through reason without taking account of the constitution of sensibility, we therefore assert the empirical reality of space with respect to all possible outer experiences. Though, to be sure, at the same time, its transcendental ideality, that it is nothing as soon as we leave out the condition of the possibility of all experiences, and it has something that grounds the things in themselves. Besides space, however, there is no other subjective representation related to something external that would be called a priori objective. Hence, the subjective condition of all outer appearances cannot be compared with any other. The pleasant taste of a wine does not belong to the objective determination of the wine, thus of an object even considered as an appearance, but rather to the particular constitution of sense in the subject that enjoys it. Colours are not objective qualities of the bodies to the intuition of which they are attached, but are also only modifications of the sense of sight, which is affected by light in a certain way. Space, on the contrary, is a condition of outer objects, necessarily belongs to their appearance or intuition. Taste and colours are by no means necessary conditions under which alone the objects can be objects of the senses for us. They are only combined with the appearances as contingently added effects of the particular organization. Hence, they are not a priori representations, but are grounded on sensation, and pleasant taste is even grounded on feeling of pleasure and displeasure as an effect of the sensation. And no one can have a priori the representation either of a color or of any taste, but space concerns only the pure form of intuition, that it includes no sensation, nothing empirical in itself, and all kinds of determinations of space can and even must be able to be represented a priori of concepts of shapes as well as relations are to arise. Through space alone, it is possible for things to be outer objects for us. The aim of this remark is only to prevent one from thinking of illustrating the asserted ideality of space with completely inadequate examples, since thinking like colours, taste, etc. are correctly considered not as qualities of things, but as mere alterations of our subject, which can even be different in different people. For in this case, that which is originally itself only appearance counts in an empirical sense as a thing in itself, which yet can appear different to every eye in regard to the colour. The transcendental concept of appearances in space, on the contrary, is a critical reminder that absolutely nothing that is intuited in space is a thing in itself, and that space is not a form that is proper to anything itself, but rather that objects in themselves are not known to us at all, and that what we call outer objects are nothing other than mere representations of our sensibility, whose form is space, but whose true correlate, the thing in itself, is not to be and cannot be cognized through them, but it is also never asked after an experience. Okay, I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, I will read the section on time.